They lay hidden beneath the yellow earth, swallowed by darkness for over 2,000 years, until a ray of light in 1974 brought them into view. And they have stunned the world ever since. This is the Terracotta Army of Qin Shi Huang, located in what is now Xi'an, Shaanxi. To date, a cumulative total of 120 million people have traveled here to see it. But how many of them know that the yellow earth and broken fragments before their eyes are merely the tip of the iceberg of this magnificent historical site? The true Terracotta Army is an underground legion comprising three main branches: infantry, cavalry, and charioteers, made up of a combined total of nearly 8,000 soldiers and horses. The largest of these, pit number 1, is 230 meters long from east to west and 62 meters wide from north to south, roughly the size of two standard football fields placed end to end. It's hard for us to imagine today just how magnificent and imposing they once were. A vibrant army in full regalia. So, how did people over 2,000 years ago manage to create such a vast underground legion? And why, even today, do the vast majority of them remain buried, unable to see the light of day? What stories will we uncover when we face this army once more? In this video, we will attempt to answer these questions. And our story begins with an ambitious emperor. It was this very emperor who ended more than 500 years of warring states on the Central Plains, ultimately unifying the realm. He is known as Qin Shi Huang. And this first emperor didn't just dream of his dynasty ruling for generations. He also wished to command another world even after death. Therefore, he would create an underground army to stand guard by his side for all eternity. But in the eyes of Qin Shi Huang, the burial figurines of the time were small, crude, and poorly made. What he wanted were life-sized figures that could rival real soldiers in their size, posture, appearance, and expression. However, creating such large-scale figures was completely unprecedented, especially in such a staggering quantity of nearly 8,000. That's why, ever since the Terracotta Army was unearthed, archaeologists have been relentlessly studying how it was made. And just as you might be thinking, the first theory was that they used molds for mass production. But subsequent clues revealed that the truth wasn't nearly that simple. Researchers discovered that the bodies of these figures were hollow. On the inner surface, they found a pattern of circular ridges and could even see the clear impressions of fingerprints. This meant that the artisans weren't using molds, but rather a technique known as the coiling method. Just as the name implies, artisans would take rolled strips of clay and, starting from a pre-made food plate, coil them upwards layer by layer to form the legs. Then, using a wooden support frame, they would build the torso in the same way, before attaching the separately crafted arms to each side of the body. In fact, for the entire body, it seems only the head was made using a mold. The heads and hands of the figures were primarily made using molds, but this was just the first step. Next, the craftsmen would meticulously carve out the figures' hairstyles, eyebrows, and eyes, as well as their mustaches and even the texture of their clothing. It was precisely this manual carving that made each of the 8,000 figures unique, with no two faces alike. However, to truly rival real people, appearance alone was not enough. It seemed something was still missing, and so, the red of cinnabar, the white of kaolin clay, the blue of azurite, and the green of malachite were all extracted from ores. A type of purple, not yet found in nature, was also synthesized through artificial smelting. It became known as Chinese purple. Ultimately, these magnificent colors brought soul into the terracotta warriors. One can only imagine how shocked and amazed people were when they first laid eyes on them. But the first emperor's ambition was not merely to create lifelike figures. He wanted to forge an army just like the Qin army he was so proud of. An identical legion, one that would carry on the glory of the great Qin Empire for eternity. In the area of modern-day Gaoping City in Shaanxi's Jincheng, there is a special historical site. It was here, about 2,000 to 100 years ago, that the Qin army, led by Bai Jie, beheaded and buried alive over 400,000 soldiers of the Zhou state. This greatly accelerated the Qin state's process of unification. This is known in history as the Battle of Changping. The incredibly fierce Qin soldiers would carry severed heads as trophies while hunting down their enemies, striking terror into the hearts of the other states. And from Duke Xi of Qin to the first emperor, Yingzheng, countless wars of all sizes like this were waged. This ultimately allowed the state of Qin to sweep through the 6 other states and unify all under heaven. However, this wasn't because the Qin people were born to be fierce warriors. Instead, according to Qin law, as long as you killed an enemy on the battlefield, anyone had the chance to be promoted in rank and title. From the lower ranks of Gongxi and Shangzhou to Guannu and Chehu, there were a total of 20 levels of nobility for the common person. This was practically the only way to change one's destiny. This was the Qin system of military meritocracy. Driven by it, an army of tigers and wolves, eager and proficient in battle, emerged on the world stage. Of course, having brave soldiers alone was far from enough. This army also had to be equipped with the finest weapons. The Qin sword was nearly 30 centimeters longer than the bronze swords of the other states. Yet it remained sufficiently hard, making it easier to stab an enemy during combat. Furthermore, the antioxidation treatment on its surface meant that it remained incredibly sharp, even when unearthed today. The Qin crossbow had a wider and thicker stock, a longer prod, and a more precise aiming system. Some scholars speculate that the effective range of this crossbow could reach beyond 138 meters. It was an absolutely dominant weapon for its time, and the arrowheads used by the Qin crossbow were trifaceted. Its frontal profile is remarkably similar to the curve of a modern semi-automatic rifle bullet. More importantly, the base of each arrowhead had an average deviation of only 0.83 millimeters. This proves that the Qin state at the time had already achieved standardized production of its weapons. Besides equipment, this army also had too. It required the most sophisticated tactics. For example, Pit number 1 houses the main force, comprised of infantry. The vanguard at the very front of the formation, a do-or-die squad, wore no armor, allowing them to be swift and agile, armed mainly with bows and crossbows. Once they drew their bows, 3 ranks would rotate seamlessly, unleashing a relentless shower of arrows. Inside the formation were soldiers wielding long weapons like dagger axes, spears, halberds, and pikes, as well as heavy infantrymen armed with short swords and other short-range weapons. Their main responsibility was close-quarters combat, on the flanks and at the rear of the formation. The soldiers all stood facing outwards, guarding against attacks from every direction. In total, nearly 6,000 soldiers and horses were arranged in dozens of columns, standing in stern formation, and this type of combined arms formation is even more evident in Pit number 2. They are crossbowmen, cavalry, and charioteers. The 3 main branches of the army complemented one another, creating an unstoppable force. Of course, an army is nothing without its generals. Pit number 3 served as the command headquarters, where battle plans were devised. It's not hard to imagine what a powerful state would be needed to create such a formidable army. With its courageous soldiers, superior equipment, and complete military structure. What's more, when we look at the entire layout of the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor, we realize this magnificent army is merely one small part of it in this subterranean empire. Besides the pits of terracotta warriors and horses, there are also pits for stone armor and stables. They symbolize the comprehensive military power of the Qin Empire. Not only that, but there are also 8 life-sized figures of civil officials, symbolizing the judiciary, or tingwei. 2 sets of bronze chariots and horses, each weighing over a ton, were responsible for the emperor's transportation, managed by the grand coachman. There were even entertainers and acrobats, as well as 46 bronze waterfalls, seemingly dancing gracefully. Surrounded by these numerous officials and soldiers, the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor was built in the center, with its burial mound standing over 50 meters high. Inside, a 9-story platform was built for the emperor's soul to ascend and roam. Below ground, reaching a depth of -1 meters, lay the underground palace. Here, mercury was used to create flowing rivers, simulating the empire's geography, while constellations on the ceiling mirrored the cosmos. This was the eternal, subterranean empire built by the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, but while this emperor took with him endless riches and supreme power, and even created his own personal sun, moon, and stars, he could not take the beautiful land with him, nor could he secure everlasting peace. The once glorious dynasty was ultimately destined to fall. In 1979, less than 3 kilometers west of pit number 1 of the Terracotta Army, a burial site was discovered. The skeletons buried here were haphazardly discarded, some even decapitated. Their identities were crudely inscribed on broken pottery shards, a few simple words becoming the only trace of their existence. One of them was a mausoleum builder named Ye. He was originally a minor official from Lanling in Shandong, but after being unable to pay a fine for an offense, he was sentenced to labor on the Guangzhou Plain, thousands of miles from his home. Compared to the lofty Emperor Qin Shi Huang, he was just a humble tomb builder. To fulfill the emperor's grandiose dream, he toiled day and night. He eventually died from illness brought on by hunger and exhaustion. He was hastily buried, with only this broken roof towel to accompany him. According to historical records, as many as 700,000 laborers were conscripted from all over the country to build the mausoleum at Mount Li. But as the saying goes, a state, however large, is doomed to perish if it is warlike. The Qin Empire was constantly expanding its borders and undertaking massive construction projects. Yet it left no time for the nation and its people to rest and recover. To a certain extent, this also sealed its fate and led to its downfall. Around the time of Emperor Qin Shi Huang's death, a group of conscripted laborers was being transported from Suzhou in Jiangsu province. They were being escorted to Mount Li, but they never actually made it. Instead, they chose to follow the official escorting them to seek a different path, and that official's name was Liu Bang. Shortly after, another group of men were being conscripted for border duty. Under the leadership of Chen Sheng and Wu Guang, they let out the defiant cry, "Our kings and generals destined by birth." And soon, they reached the foot of Mount Li. In the end, the Qin dynasty, which had unified China, lasted for only 15 years before it collapsed spectacularly. And yet, until that very moment, the first emperor's subterranean army remained motionless. It simply vanished from the world, buried under layers of yellow earth, and was gradually forgotten. It wasn't until more than 2,000 years later, when villagers in Xiang Village, Lintang County, Xi'an, were digging a well, that they accidentally discovered the shattered torso of a clay figure, bringing that long-lost piece of history back to light. However, the skin of the terracotta warriors is composed of a layer of raw lacquer and a layer of paint. Over several millennia, the organic materials in them have long since deteriorated. Once excavated and exposed to air, the aged lacquer layer quickly cracks and flakes away. This forces archaeologists to constantly spray the surface with distilled water just to maintain humidity. They then have to use scalpels or even more precise medical instruments to carry out the excavation piece by piece. Adding to the difficulty, the bodies of most of the warriors had been shattered for a very long time. This is why so many archaeologists have dedicated nearly their entire lives to battling this degradation. And to fully restore the thousands of terracotta warriors, it could still take another 100 years. Even for the warriors that have already been restored, they are still susceptible to damage from corrosive gases, dust, bacteria, temperature, humidity, and light. This is one of the reasons why many areas of Emperor Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum complex still cannot be easily excavated today. So this brings us back to the question from the beginning of the video. As we stand today before this subterranean army from over 2,000 years ago, what is it that we are truly seeing? Is it magnificence? Yes. Is it suffering? Yes, that too. We can imagine. What an incredibly ambitious empire it must have been to build such a formidable army and command such a mighty subterranean legion, ruling over such a vast territory, pioneering a unified script and system of laws, and even forging a unified nation that endures to this day. We can also imagine the arduous labor of the hundreds of thousands who built the mausoleum, the bloody battles fought by millions of soldiers, and the tens of thousands of ordinary people who formed rebel armies, desperately hoping to defy their fate. But whether glorious or tragic, it is all a very real part of our history. The earth may have buried them, but time will never forget them. Just like these 8,000 terracotta warriors, we may never know their real names, but their images are forever immortalized here. When sunlight touches them again after more than 2,000 years, it's as if they are silently telling a story of all the years and events that forged Chinese civilization, and how it will all become an inseparable part of our bloodline, passed down from one generation to the next, on this very same land, under the very same starry sky.